Oh, should be able to share my slides now. So let's have a look. There we go. So tell me when you can see this.
Yeah, looking good so far. Yeah.
Yep. Put it onto present mode. So we all got big slides?
Yep.
Yep. Excellent. So the word for our session is paroxysm. How about that one? That's one for you to take away today. So what we're aiming for here is a little bit of excitement. And as Gary said, what we want to try and do is make it interactive. So I think there was a bit of poetic license from Gary around my introduction. I've never called myself an expert in anything, because we know an X is a has-been and a spurt is a jet of water under pressure. So I'm neither of those, but what I am, and we'll get onto that in a second. I'll talk through a bit of a background introduction, but this is very much a celebration of the 12-month, the first year, 12 months of the contact center network. And actually an awful lot of the people that I've seen on here today have been here for the entire journey. So hopefully you like Gary's little caricature I'll put up there. So happy birthday to the contact center network. So who am I? I'm Graham Bunting. I have a consultancy practice called Trust Business Partners, having spent, I don't know, probably 25, 30 years in the corporate world. I left that, started a consultancy practice about 4 years ago. And at the moment, we're representing a number of different brands here in the region, one of which is Cupid. This is not a technology specific pitch, but this is intended to be a little look at what's going on in the technology space vis-a-vis what we've all enjoyed or not enjoyed around being separate from what's been our traditional workplace. And Gary called me a geek. I wouldn't say I was a self-confessed geek, but I'm not sure which of these applies to me. So it says a person often an intellectual bent who is disliked. Well, hopefully not. Certainly not intellectual. I'm probably the one in the middle, which is an enthusiast, somebody who really appreciates technology, but not technology for the sake of technology. Technology that really adds value in a very practical way. And I've actually got some quite interesting stories that I've kind of experienced over the years that I think are quite amusing in some respects. So what are the aims for this presentation? Really simple, just stimulate some conversation amongst the group. Think about technology, but its importance around how it enables us as humans. So technology is great, technology has its place, and I think there's certain sectors of society that love it, but technology on its own is a little bit dull, I think. So not here to preach or teach, just to kind of share, create a little bit of impetus for thinking about technology in our work environments and how it works. And again, I've got some stories that kind of talk to that. So topic is technology as an enabler, and enabling is all about getting you where you need to get to. So much of the enabling technology I think we've seen, and certainly over the last year, is about disaggregation. So it's taking away the location from the activity. And increasingly, it's about how we can bring people together without the need for us all to be in the same location. And I guess topical for the contact center network, these are some of the themes that I think we're seeing. Certainly we've seen over the last year, and actually a lot of them now are emerging as we get to this back to the office type conversation underway. So picking out from that, we've got things like touchless. I think people are increasingly thinking about how they can get back to a safe work environment. But all of this technology is fine. It's about the people, right? So we're all people, we're all customers of somebody, and ultimately this technology has to serve us as people in terms of how we engage with organizations. So a little statistics, you may have seen some of these stats already. Actually, a lot of this stuff, if you're interested, and I don't know whether you know, but there's a lady called Dr. Nicola Millard, who used to have a funky title, works for BT, used to have a really funky title as, I think it was Chief Futurologist. She's got something way more grounded as a title now, but there's loads of really interesting stats that I saw her present last year. If you guys are interested, I've got a load of the slides that I can share with you, but I've got a few key points here that I think are quite interesting. And I guess increasingly, this is the tone of what I'm reading, which is 74% of consumers are likely to buy a product or service based on experience alone. So I know price and value and all those kind of things are important, but we've all had some really good experiences. I dare say we've all had some pretty poor experiences too. And they generally will I'd probably call it the Amazon effect, and Spencer, who actually works for AWS here, will probably appreciate that. But Amazon, I think, you know, they've really set the tone for our expectations in terms of same day, next day delivery, and pretty much no quibble if we want to return something that's not quite what we expect. So technology and innovation. Let's take a look at some of the things that we've seen in the workplace that have kind of embraced technology to address this whole notion of disaggregation of location and activity. Can't do a presentation without talking about COVID, I guess. So we've seen a significant impact from the way in which we all work. We were all forced to work from home, work remotely, and actually for the contact center environment, that was a huge challenge, particularly for those people that had a lot of on-premise technology that was perhaps a little bit, you know, well invested, but not necessarily flexible enough to enable that stuff. In terms of that whole digital adoption, that digital transformation, here's some stats that you've probably all seen. I've probably seen many times, I'm sure, over the last year. Forrester were showing us that people's digital transformation journeys have accelerated at such a rate. We've seen something like 5 years worth of transition and change in a very short period of months. So I guess we've all experienced that to a greater or lesser degree in our workspace. So just want to run through some, by the way, if anybody's got any questions at any time, just shout out, stick your hand up or whatever, and we'll pause. But what I want to do is just talk through a few things that we see in the marketplace that have certainly accelerated over the last few years, but talk to this whole notion of how technology is helping us do our work better, smarter. So this example here is about collaboration, and I think that top left picture will probably all be something that you've all seen, and maybe even in your own offices at some point, I'm sure. So we have walls and walls with sticky notes and whiteboard stuff all over the place, written lines everywhere, and so on and so forth. But that relies on people being in the same location. It relies on people being at the same location at the same time. So COVID clearly put the kibosh on that, and the whole idea of us coming together needed some technology to enable that. So we moved away from this very manual process where it was all real time, real location, typically single use, because oftentimes if you've got stuff in a meeting space that's confidential, when you finish your meeting, you have to lock the door. So all of that then moved into this digital world. So you end up with virtual canvases, with virtual stick-it notes, with people being able to dial in from any location on any device, share and interact. So that for me is a really good example of how technology has enabled us to continue doing the stuff we're doing. You might argue in a smarter way. It's not for everybody. All of these things are change, and we all fit on that change continuum somewhere. Some of us love it, some of us are not so keen, but ultimately that's how technology is helping us in that space. It is another great example. We have a typical environment where you enter an office and you're greeted by a receptionist or somebody who's front of house. Nice smiley individual, hopefully, unless it's the doctor's surgery, in which case you get to speak to somebody, they take your details, they tell the person that you're meeting, and then you either get directed to where you need to go to, or they'll come and meet you in reception. What we're seeing now is a lot of technology which is removing the human from that situation, and actually replacing them, not necessarily completely removing, but replacing them with screens. So you walk into an unmanned or unpersoned reception, you either press on a button on the screen, and then you're connected via video with a human being who you can interact with. And you can set these things up to work on just QR codes. So oftentimes you don't even need a display in the reception, just a QR code. You can then have a conversation with somebody who can do all the same stuff that a receptionist would do in terms of greeting you. But some clever stuff that you can do beyond this is, once you're checked in, they can give you some directions with arrows or other things, and using multiple tablets, they can hop or teleport from tablet to tablet. So as you're walking down a corridor, for example, they can pop up in front of you and say, "Hi, it's me again. At the end here, turn left," and so on. So this kind of technology is all about disaggregating, again, bringing out people from that reception desk, putting them elsewhere in the organization, but still making them available to greet people. And this is what we're doing now, right? So I guess we've probably all experienced every flavour of meeting technology going. Zoom still seems to be doing remarkably well, but I think Teams has started to perhaps regain some ground, and I think Teams has become a real driver for a lot of the other technologies that we're seeing increasingly with unified comms, with other contact center solutions. People are looking more and more to consolidate things into fewer desktop applications. So, integration is all becoming quite important. And of course, we've moved away from good old letter writing to electronic forms. And again, Teams comes in here, email, etc. But I think you often find things go full circle. So receiving a handwritten letter now is potentially quite high value. And oftentimes you'll find people, when they're looking to make introductions, they're looking at new ways of doing it, or perhaps revisiting old ways. So bringing in this kind of old way of doing things has a certain value. And then bringing it into perhaps some of the current things that we're all thinking about, going from contact center agents to perhaps robotic agents. Well, perhaps not. So I think that's a common fear. I think many people working in our environment seem to be concerned about automation, technology, robots replacing us. I don't buy that personally. What I do buy is that these technologies are here as an augmentation and a support mechanism, because increasingly, increasingly we are both demanding and opening up other channels of communication into an organization. So we've gone from call centers where we had a telephone number and would ring in and we'd queue and get to speak to hopefully a helpful agent. Increasingly, we're getting more options. So we now have the ability to send an email, which comes in different forms. So it might be an email address or a web form, etc. And then we start to get additional things being added into the communications capability. As
where I started, this slide really talks to the fact that what we're enabling now is the ability to bring in multiple channels, but actually recognize that the customer has a choice. So whichever channel the customer chooses to come into, and it could well be that they choose to come in on a voice call, they could hit a significant queue and then have an option through the IVR to deflect into an automation self-service channel. So the customer could then be simply shifted at their behest to, let's say, a chatbot or a WhatsApp discussion, and then they hopefully serve themselves successfully. But if not, the option's always there, either through automation, understanding and interpreting the sentiment of the conversation, or electing to escalate to an agent. The great thing here is that it's a single conversation, a single uninterrupted conversation. So should the option arise and the customer ends up talking to an agent, then the agent has all the context from the persistent chat, so they can see exactly what that particular customer has been doing, and then they can pick up that thread and help them out from that particular standpoint. So this is really where artificial intelligence is adding huge value by helping customers serve themselves, putting intelligent conversation and communication in place, understanding their intent, but also with the Cupid platform, the ability to capture that entire conversation and interaction such that the agent is well prepared. So, this is all about augmenting that customer journey for both the customer and the. So loads of ways in which we can automate, but technology really is the enabler for that. It really is all about the customer interaction. Cupid really takes the two ends, if you will, and glues them nicely together by leveraging all the tools. So if we look at the left of this particular slide, we can see customers arrive in an organization for a number of different reasons. You can see the list here. I want to order something, I want to report something, I want to locate something, I want to find information, I want to make a payment, etc., etc. So we arrive at the organization with an outcome in mind. On the other side, the business is receiving the interaction. They need to check and validate certain things. So they're looking for confirmation of who's on the call, who's making contact. Can you validate it? Have you got an order number? Have you got an account number, etc.? And in the middle is where Cupid sits with all the tools and the back-end processes to make that journey as friction-free as possible. So this is all about joining those two pieces together in a very seamless fashion. A Few statistics that we've pulled together. I mentioned earlier in our presentation where we sourced them from. So if anybody's interested in more of that, do let me know. But this is all telling us that as consumers, we're looking for simplicity. So 75% are saying they're buying more things from customers that businesses that make it easy for them. Amazon's a really good case in point, isn't it? I know they've kind of captured the market a little bit, but they make it so easy for us. Some might say too easy. You know, with one-click purchase, the ability to get stuff same day, next day, that kind of stuff. So it really is a very simple, frictionless process. Sadly, lots of organizations are doing a really bad job of this, and I think this probably talks to this whole idea of this tactical implementation of additional channels. So, you know, as customers are demanding and as levels of interactions increase, organizations have looked to adding digital services, so WhatsApp, SMS, Twitter, Facebook, etc. But by and large, these things have not been done in a coherent fashion. So you end up with a Twitter channel that's largely manned and run by the marketing teams and corporate, pushing out messages, you know, perhaps picking things up, listening for comments and adding them, but actually it's not really joined up with the core of the business, the contact center. So I think the school report says could do better. It's all about bringing these into a single experience. People do like these technologies. There's very much a demographic around it, so they're not for everybody, but actually it's about meeting people on their channel of choice. And we see right here on the right hand side, there is a significant expectation now that organizations are going to start to deploy some of this smart technology to make that the customer journey and actually the experience in engaging with that organization better. So a few examples of use cases across different industries using AI and automation to meet customer need on their channel of choice. So we believe that it's critical to provide a choice to allow customers to access services as they want, sorry, when they want, and how they want. So this particular example, you can see it's a city council example. But this is a simple transaction. So we arrive on the website, you see it's a just-in-time app type experience. So it's not an app, this is just an app experience. So we can automate a lot of the common processes. In this particular example, you can see the ability to search for things like reporting. So I might want to report fly tipping, report potholes, etc. So I can do it very, very simply on a just-in-time app experience. But actually I can also send additional information. So I can take a photo from my smartphone and send that in along with location information using things like what 3 words, for example. So we can send all that stuff in without having to go onto a website and search through it. So it's about making that guided experience very efficient and dare I say enjoyable for the user. Is another typical example. This is for housing or searching for accommodation, and we see in this particular case it's about triage. So we start off gathering some information, or in some cases we might actually point them in another direction. So for example, if you take housing, there are certain circumstances where before they apply for services they need to register elsewhere. So we can effectively deflect, but actually through an information page. So let's say we're looking for this information, we can then send them with a link through to another location and bring them back, well, they can come back later and complete that particular transaction. So we can still give them the option to get through to an agent, but actually we make sure that before they arrive at the agent, all the steps are in place so that their journey and the agent experience are better. And of course, what we've talked about here is the proliferation of channels. So, you know, we've got a couple of examples here. This is an insurance company where you can see we're leveraging the infrastructure of the chat services, so WhatsApp and SMS, for example. So we're clearly limited by what the interface in those circumstances offers, but you know, there's a fairly rich capability to have a persistent conversation. I think that's one of the real benefits, is the fact that the conversation is persistent. So we can see the entire conversation journey, as can the agent on receipt of the call. And of course, I think the other important note there is that it is a common experience. So whichever channel they come in, they're having a similar a similar experience, because we've built the experience once and then we can deploy it across all the channels. And outbound as well. So here's a great example of how organizations are potentially using this platform to notify customers, for example, past dues, and then we can give them a link to come back into the business portal and make a payment. So, you know, this is very much about automating, sending a piece of information to a customer's mobile phone, and then they can action that even if they're traveling to work on a bus, on a train, or whatever. It could be an asynchronous type of conversation, for example, if they're using WhatsApp. So lots and lots of different ways. It's about understanding your customers, it's understanding the tools that your customer's using, but automating this takes your cost of transaction down to a trivial cost versus putting an expensive agent making lots of calls and bringing people in. So there's a limit to what they can do, and of course, you know, technology, automation, it's a 24/7 type operation. And here's I think, hopefully a nice summary page. So this is left-hand side, allowing, or I suppose opening up rather than allowing, opening up different channels for customers to come in on. And, you know, we're seeing more and more of these appearing all the time, like Apple Business Chat and so on and so forth. So all these different channels are the route in, and in some cases the route in could be they've hit the IVR, it's a very busy day, the queue times are ridiculous, and we've given them the option to self-serve, and they'll then come back in via a digital channel. A conversational interface, which is a just-in-time web app type feel, mobile app type feel, using context, so we understand who they are and what's been going on. And you can see in this particular example, using the AI, we know that this guy, Dan Adler, has a credit card application pending, and therefore that may well be the reason why Dan's been making contact. So we can then push him an option that says, do you want an update on your application? We also enable natural language, so if we look at the bottom, the smart options are there because we know they're the most popular things at this time, but actually it might not be one of those options, and then Dan can simply type in what he's looking for, and using natural language and predictive, it can offer, you know, the types of services that are available. And then back end, we automate. So this is about doing, it's not just about a conversation. So we can automate an entire process. So it might well be that payment process. So we've sent an SMS, they've come in, yes, I want to make a payment. We can take them through to a payment gateway, make that payment with PCI and HIPAA compliant, and then we serve that particular customer with that automation journey. If, however, they get stuck in that journey, we can pass them to a voice channel to speak to an agent, and then when the agent receives the interaction, they can see everything that's happened up until that point. They can greet the customer personally. The customer feels like they're valued because you know who they are. And here's just a few examples of how that same experience is built across different platforms. So whether it's SMS, whether it's a just-in-time web app or WhatsApp, we're fundamentally giving them the same experience, but we're using the framework that exists. And then finally, I guess this is a summary. This is all about creating thoughtful customer journeys. So understanding who our customers are, how they're arriving, what they're looking for, understanding the sentiment of their reason. So we know probably before they arrive what they're likely to, you know, what their mindset's likely to be. So, you know, if we're chasing them for payment, they're probably not going to be feeling great about being chased. So we need to be on our mettle to make sure that we still try and make that conversation or that engagement as pleasant as we can. So this is really bringing all of that technology into play to augment that customer experience. And finally, I think the point there is it's avoiding all of that repetition, which we all know is incredibly irritating. So once we've told the organization by typing it in or responding to an IVR, the last thing we want to do is when we get to an agent is to have to repeat that. So all of this is about creating those thoughtful joined journeys. Last couple of slides here. I think Gary was asking whether there were some tips and ideas, and I think here's some really simple stuff that I'm sure many of you are doing already, but if you're not, it's worth checking. So first off, if you haven't done it already, then it's certainly time to start looking at cloud-based applications. It gives you that huge flexibility, it gives you that agility, it gives you that ability to stretch up and down very easily. And of course, you know, it enables the stuff that we've seen certainly for the last year or two, which is that flexible working. One of my big bugbears is understanding what your customer experience is like. So what I would say is check that customer experience. Is it what you're expecting? Is it what you want for your customers? I think a lot of C-suite executives don't really understand what the customer journey looks like. So check it and make sure you know what it looks like and make sure it represents what you want it to represent. Digital transformation has been talked about for years and years. It's well underway, and I think we should use this as the opportunity to consider consolidating a lot of these areas of technologies, making sure you're not building complexity on top of complexity, but using the opportunity to simplify. And I guess in doing that, look at the long-term impact of your investment decisions, ensure that you're not taking yourself into a cul-de-sac. So you're not painting yourself into a corner. There are some technologies that are perhaps mainstream and are broadly available, others perhaps less so. So make sure that when you're investing in these technologies that you're not reducing your options. And to the next point, what you can manage yourself means it gives you that much greater business agility. So in the case of the technology I've spoken about, the Cupid stuff, it's a no-code, low-code solution, which means you can build these interaction journeys yourself in-house without any reference to any external agencies. That can be a real game changer for the customers. And coming back to this other point about digital transformation, platform, reducing the number of platforms, are you leveraging that? Take a look at how your platforms all interoperate, so you can reduce the real estate on the desktop. And in saying all of that, what I would suggest is it's probably worth investing time with people who are not necessarily vendor aligned. So you're going to get best advice across all platforms, all technologies. Probably worth investing that time with a consultant to get best advice. So I guess in order to deliver on customers' expectations, it does require a little bit of effort, but effort up front, bit of planning will ensure that you get the reward. So best view comes after the hardest climb. Make sure you do the hard yards and then continue to iterate and make sure that customer experience is what you would expect it to be. And I quite like this one. It's an NLP presupposition. There is no failure or any feedback. NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, not natural language processing. This really talks to the notion of how you see things. So constantly looking at what the feedback is from the customer, even if it's an angry bit of feedback, consider that as an opportunity and make sure you take that into consideration when you're thinking about those customer experience journeys. And finally, I quite like this. I thought I'd share this with you. This is actually a genuine call center conversation. I know you can read, but I will read it just for simplicity in case you're listening to this. So the customer says, I've been ringing 0700 2300 for 2 days and can't get through to inquiries. Can you help? The operator replies with, where did you get that number from, sir? The customer says, it was on the door to the travel centre. The operator replies, sir, there are opening times. And there's many stories like that, which I think can be amusing. So in closing, I've been Graham Bunting from Trust Business Partners, currently representing Cupid and other vendors here in the region. My contact details are here. I can be reached at graham@cupid.ai too, or 0800 999 1882. Be good to speak to you.